Oh my gosh. Of course it is. Okay. I read this? Okay. For this one, number 9. Okay. I'm ready. You ready? You guys ready? Ready? Planning Commission agenda, City of Hemet, California, Tuesday, May 17th, 2022 is now called to order. The City of Hemet is providing alternative measures for the public to attendance view Planning Commission's meeting. Council chamber in-person participation is limited in the council chamber in order to maintain social distancing room capacity. Live stream, this meeting will be live streamed on the city's website at hemetca.gov/agenda. Public comments, member of the public who wish to comment on matters before the commission in lieu of attending in person may submit comments on or before 2 p.m. the day of the meeting by using the following link: online comment form. Comments will be recorded in official meeting record. Teleconference. Residents may also submit public comments to teleconference during communications from the public by using the following Zoom link. See below. Call to order. HP, can we get a roll call?
Sure. Chair Wirth.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Beamsterfer. Here. Commissioner Lemke.
Present.
Commissioner Hill is absent. And Commissioner Booth. Here. You.
I ask you to do the invocation and flag salute tonight, sir. Thank you. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dear God, thank you for bringing us here tonight, and thank you for keeping us in good health and keeping us safe. We pray for Mr. Commissioner Hill, as his absent, that he is okay and that he'll be here at our next meeting. And Lord, just guide us through today and the decisions we make. Amen.
Chairwoman, seeing as how Commissioner Hill is absent, would the commission like to make a motion to excuse the absence of the commissioner?
I'd like to make a motion to excuse Commissioner Hill from Planning Commission meeting May 17th, 2022.
I'll second.
Chair, because we actually have a member teleconferencing in, we will have to do roll call votes for the evening.
I have a motion by Commissioner Beamsterfer, second by Commissioner Lemke. Commissioner Lemke,
Yes.
Commissioner Beamsterfer,
Yes.
Commissioner Booth,
Yes.
Chairman Wirth.
Yes.
That motion passes.
Thank you. Number 4, oath of office for new Commissioner Booth.
Commissioner Booth, can I have you raise your right hand? I, Robert Blake, and repeat after me. I, Robert Blake Booth,
I, Robert Blake Booth,
solemnly swear that I will support and defend
solemnly swear that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States,
and the Constitution of the State of California
Constitution of California,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
that I will bear true faith and allegiance
and I'll bear true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
Constitution of California,
State of California,
California,
and that I take this obligation freely
and I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully
and I will well and faithfully
discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
and discharge the duties faithfully upon which I'm about to enter. Awesome.
The next item is nomination and election of planning commissioner for chair for 2023. Chairman Wirth, would you like to call that?
Well, I would, as far as making a nomination for a new chair.
No, to call the nomination and election. I just want you to call number 5 because you are our chairman and you have to be on the line.
Absolutely. So I would like to request a nomination for a new commission chair for 2022 and 2023. Are there any on the floor?
Commissioner Cindy Lakimi.
Oh, I thought you were going to nominate him. Okay.
A second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Beamsterfer, a second by Commissioner Booth. Commissioner Lemke.
I'm sorry. So
Taking a roll call vote. Commissioner Lemke,
yes.
Commissioner Beamsterfer,
Yes.
Commissioner Booth, Chairman Wirth.
Yes.
That motion passes with Commissioner Hill absent.
Nomination and election of planning commission vice chair for 2022-2023. Can I hear a nomination for the vice chair? Can I nominate a vice chair? Can I nominate you, Jacob Beamster, for vice chair?
I'd be happy to accept.
I will second.
Thank you.
I have a motion by Chair Lemke, second by Commissioner Wirth. Chair Lemke,
Yes.
Commissioner Beamsterfer,
Yes.
Commissioner Booth, Commissioner Wirth.
Yes.
That motion passes 4-0.
Can I take a brief recess for reorganization of commission members? So, yeah, he's gonna move.
I'm taking two of these.
We're back in session. The approval of the minutes, can I get a motion to move that to the next meeting since the link to the minutes is worked on?
I'd like to make a motion to move the approval minutes from the planning commission meeting, May 3rd, 2022 to our next following meeting.
I'll second.
I have a motion by Vice Chair Beamsterfer, second by Chair Lemke. Chair Lemke,
Yes.
Vice Chair Beamsterfer,
Yes.
Commissioner Booth, Commissioner Wirth.
Yes.
That motion passes 4-0.
Just to clarify, that would be June 7th, planning commission meeting.
We will now open the public comment period. At this time, members of the public may only comment on an item not appearing on the agenda. Please adhere to the following when addressing the planning commission. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes or less. Comments should be directed to the commission as a whole and not directed to an individual commission members. Please take note that commission can take no action on matters that are not part of the agenda. Please follow the adopted rules of decorum resolution number 4545. Marianne Durham? Darwin, my apologies. Would you like to share your address with us?
Sure, I'm at 572 Toledo in Hemet. I have a couple questions coming up and just wanting it to be on record that as you go around the city and as I've been coming to these meetings, so I'm not exactly sure how much power you guys have, but I'd like to ask a few questions about, we do have code enforcement. I know we're kind of revamping that and working on that and getting a few other people up to speed and running on that. So we can start doing a few things in the city that have probably been overlooked in how I feel. Some things have been overlooked and just keep going on and no one's really been addressing it. So what I'd like to start with though is that so Sweet Baby Jane's was just sold to someone who owns a lot of property here in Hemet on Harvard and should know the rules and should know how the city operates and what is required. And yet he leaves his trash cans out on 4th Street, taking up about 4 or 5 parking spaces, which as far as ABC goes, when you have a bar, those need to be locked up because you'll have people rummaging through because there is glass and alcoholic bottles that are thrown in there. So those kind of issues are what I'd like to see starting going forward, that we are making sure that everybody is following what the city puts in place as far as the rules and regulations for the code enforcement. Also, too, is that there is a building on Harvard that was reconstructed, but has been deemed not safe, but still keeps getting their business license still keeps getting extended, I guess I want to say, where they really haven't fixed some of the problems. They have water issues, backup issues that they really should fix if they're serving food. I do work for the senior center in San Jacinto, and we have checks all the time about how sanitary we are and what our kitchens do look like. So I would like to start, and I have been coming to these meetings recently, and I would like to start seeing that we are starting to go up to speed and that we are going to start holding some of these landlords accountable for the actions for Hemet, because we'd like to all see it flourish. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any electronic or?
Thank you, Chair. I never received any electronically submitted public comments. We have some attendees in the Zoom teleconference. If anybody would like to discuss or have a public comment on items not appearing on the agenda, now's the time to do so. Please raise your hand if anybody would like to speak. I'm seeing no hands raised, Chair, no public comment.
We'll close public comment period. Number 10A, receive and file. Number 10A, conformance of the City of Hemet's capital improvement CIP for fiscal years 22-23 to 2026-27 with the City of Hemet general plan. Staff report, please.
Good evening, Chair Lemke, members of the commission. I'm Steve Lariso, an engineering consultant here to present the requesting conformance of the CIP program with the requesting conformance of the CIP with the general plan. And got that out of my system, we'll move on. So. As I've noted up here, it applies, or the action that we're asking for tonight complies with two of the components of the strategic plan that council has set forward. And just a little bit of background of the conformance with the general plan. Section C.P.2 of the circulation element does talk about what a capital improvement program is, and it talks about the fact that it has to be prepared annually and identifies all the improvements or the proposed improvements for the city. You may recall over the last couple of years, we've been working on preparing a much longer CIP document. We started out with a single year about 3 years ago, and now we're up to a 2-year as of last year. And coming up, we will be presenting a 5-year CIP to the council come up in June. This is just giving you a little bit of background on some of the funding sources that the city receives on an annual basis. Some of the major ones that we utilize for the engineering department for roads is Measure A and the Road Maintenance and Rehabilitation Account, which is one of those new gas tax ones that voters approved a couple of years back. For the 2022-2023 fiscal year, we anticipate about $12 million in projects, with 5.5 of that going towards pavement rehabilitation and about 6.5 with water and sewer projects alone. As I mentioned earlier, what we're trying to do is we're asking for your determination that this CIP is consistent with the general plan. It is referenced a couple times in the general plan document, the primary one being the circulation element, C-P-2 that I mentioned earlier. And just wanted to read off some of the items that are in there, or the components. It's meant to address improvements to roadways and intersections, fund right-of-way acquisition to improve local circulation and congestion, and acquire and expend funds from available transportation financing. So if we went back one page, you can see all the different types of financing that we try to obtain throughout the year as well. So what we're asking for tonight is for the Planning Commission to adopt the resolution finding the capital improvement program for fiscal years 2022-2023 through 2026-2027 to be consistent with the City of Hemet's general plan. And with that, I'm here for any questions you may have.
Any questions from our commissioners?
Is the vehicle tax, gas tax, is that also a part of what we're going to be discussing with the vehicle? It's been an upcoming discussion, the VMT, I think what we're going to be discussing. Is that also the same thing as same category?
No, the VMT is different than what a CIP program is being presented tonight.
Okay. So it's not related to what's coming up. It's been printed in this for a few times.
Correct. It's not related. Not directly.
Are you on a time frame for this, or our approval for this, with the time frame for our approval to go to city
Yeah, you
Council.
have about 30 seconds left. No.
But the reason I ask is because we just installed
Understood.
Commissioner Booth, and I'm not sure that he had enough time to kind of also weigh in and kind of read through. And I would hate for you to have to make a decision without putting, but I also want to make sure that we're not delaying you with trying to get the funds that you need for.
Well, our proposed plan right now is to take the full CIP document to the city council at the second meeting in June. Our next step in this process would be to take it to the Infrastructure Commission, which is scheduled for the first meeting in June. And I want to say that's June 6th. So to answer your question, as far as timing, it's at your discretion on that.
Chair, Commissioner Wirth.
Hey, how's it going? Steve, got a question for you. In our general plan progress report that was submitted, one of there's quite a few items that were listed there that are awaiting funding, and I understand that we can't move projects forward without funding. But I'm wondering, one element that I think is really critical for the city to address, and I don't think it's a big cost item, and I think there's a way that the city could leverage other agencies' assistance, is in regards to updating our landscape guidelines. It's community design CD-P-6. And I would like the city to, I'd like staff to consider seeing if there's a room in this budget to put a small amount towards advancing that effort. With the current drought situation, we're going to be needing to be on the forefront of making sure we're doing what we need to do in water conservation to allow the development. So this is something that I think we don't want to wait. And if we have $12 million going out, I would not think it would be more than, especially considering the ability for other agencies to assist. I would think that we would be able to get through that with a very, very small budget. So I would suggest that we add that to the CIP. I understand it's not really a capital improvement project per se, but it's something that is going to be critical to facilitate development as we move forward.
Commissioner Wirth, this is HP, and we are placing that into the next year fiscal year budget. So that will be addressed on the next fiscal year budget.
So 2022, 23?
Correct.
Okay, good. What's the budget for that?
I'm sorry,
What is the budget for that?
the amount?
Yes.
I'm not quite sure, but it's somewhere in the 75,000.
Okay. That should be more than enough if we can partner with the different water agencies in our service in our area. So good to hear. Thank you. Besides that, I have no comments to the CIP.
Thank you. Is there a motion to either take this recommendation or move this to the next meeting?
I think it would be best to move it to the next meeting so that Commissioner Booth can get a little bit more insight. This is kind of a really hard thing to wrap your head around with the CIP. And just a little education reason he should be a little bit, and that's what Chairman Hakimi said. I agree that we move this to the next meeting.
All right, I hope that doesn't, I know, but we got to make sure that we're
Understood.
giving you the right recommendations informatively. Right?
Understood.
And I noticed I'm not seeing a lot of dollar amount in this particular, like we saw last year, you had a really good detailed breakdown for the different projects, but this particular proposal that we're receiving, it doesn't have a lot of breakdown. It just has, 1 point something million for this, but it really isn't a lot of numbers filling in those empty spaces. And I'm just, is that the final answer for this report, or are there going to be numbers filling in those spaces as it's being put together?
So to answer the multiple questions you have there, just the purpose of this document, where it does show the dollar amounts, for the projects in whole, is to request that the Planning Commission identifies that these projects are consistent with the general plan. When we finalize the document, which we are doing now, we put all the information together of all the individual projects, and then we have the backup sheets for every single one. And that's maybe what you're thinking about, because what we end up presenting to council is maybe about a 70, 80 page document that has every one of those sheets individually broken down, telling about the project. So,
And on that, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I don't want to delay the process. And although Commissioner Booth, you do need time, I would like your feedback on, Vice Chair Beamsdorfer and Commissioner Wirth on your feedback for either moving forward, because we are not the end all be all. It does go to council fully prepared with a lot more backup. And again, I think my concern is I didn't find anything that we were missing. And I appreciate Commissioner Wirth's feedback, but I also don't want to delay the process because I know that it has to go through several other departments. So feedback from you, and then Commissioner Wirth, I would love to see some feedback from you for us to make that final decision. Because it will delay.
It will delay.
Pretty much.
Yeah, I think if it's really up to Commissioner Booth. That was a pretty big staff report, so there's a lot of information in the report. The presentation was short and to the point, but so I defer that to Commissioner Booth as far as extending. I'm from my comment, I'm happy that it's being included in the city budget for next year for the landscape guidelines. But in regards to having enough time to kind of soak up all of the information, I'll leave that to Commissioner Booth.
Is that good right there? I would like to abstain. Is there a way that I can abstain? You guys vote?
So you're perfectly free to abstain on the basis that you don't have sufficient information at this point, if you'd like. If the commission wanted to proceed forward with it, and I know that Steve has mentioned it a couple of times. I know that the large list of projects can be intimidating. The Planning Commission does have a role in this, but it is limited.
Right.
And it is mostly related to, are these projects that Public Works and Engineering are putting together? It's not, are these wise? Are these the projects that we would pick? Is that the way we would spend the money? The question is, are those projects consistent with the city's general plan? So to give you an example, you have a circulation element in the general plan, which talks about roads and bridges. So for example, if the general plan said we're going to have a 4-lane road and the city engineer had a CIP that said, I'm going to put a 6-lane road, in the CIP, you might say, well, that's inconsistent with the general plan. So that's really the question that's being asked. The questions on, what projects are we prioritizing? How much are they going to cost? What are the funding sources we're going to use? All that information that's in the backup, that really is a city council. Like, they get into the nuts and bolts on the spending of the money and prioritization and design and all that. So it may give you a little bit of comfort when you're looking at this list and you're like, whoa, $12.5 million in projects I just got here. It may give you a little bit of comfort that it is really just a limited purpose of, is this consistent with the general plan?
So on that note, I recommend that we adopt the Planning Commission resolution finding for the capital improvement program for fiscal years 22-23 and 26-27 to be consistent with the city of Hemet's general plan.
I second.
I have a motion by Chair Lemke, second by Vice Chair Beamsterfer. Chair Lemke,
Yes.
Vice Chair Beamsterfer,
Yes.
Commissioner Booth,
I would like to abstain.
Commissioner Wirth.
Yes.
That motion passes 3-0-1 with Commissioner Booth abstaining.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Work study items, zoning cleanup, new warehouse development, staff report, please.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission and the community. I'm Monique Alanis Flater, Principal Planner. Tonight is a work study to talk about a possible zoning code amendment. This is a zoning, what we call a zoning cleanup for new warehouse development. The proposal is in alignment with the council's strategic plan of organizational effectiveness. It includes evaluating existing practices to ensure continuity with industry best practices by evaluating our municipal code. In some research that we've done more recently, it has come to our attention that industrial markets over the past several years have seen consistently higher occupancy rates and superior rental growth rates. The industrial market, it continues to be one of the hottest commercial real estate sectors and will continue to grow for the next 3 years as we understand. E-commerce is the primary demand driver. And with this provides the city with a window of opportunity to advance new employment opportunities in the city. Currently, approximately 80% of Hemet residents commute to job-rich areas because local jobs are not available here in the city, which is indicative of a severe job housing imbalance. And with that, while we look at that, we evaluate the processes that many site selectors are looking for. They're interested in streamlining the process, and in response, we continue to evaluate our application process to improve efficiency in the overall development process. And as a result, in reviewing some of our zoning codes and what the process would be for warehouse developments, we identified a discrepancy in our zoning code that could be addressed through a zoning cleanup. So first, what I wanted to do is just give a background on a zoning code cleanup that occurred in 2015. It had several amendments that reorganized the codes, the sections in more logical fashion. It eliminated duplication, updated application procedures to improve efficiency. It strengthened the required findings for application approvals. And among these changes, it included a revision to the application procedures for a site development review. Which is where we review the layout of a development, making sure it meets all of the development standards with the city, building heights, floor area, parking, architecture, all those the nuts and bolts of development. And what it did is it established 2 categories, and for the purposes of this discussion, it had 2 categories, major site development review which is reviewed by our planning commission, and minor site development review, which is reviewed more administratively by the community development director. So with that, what that means is that in that particular zoning code amendment, this is the breakdown of the types of uses that require what is a major site development review, what is a minor. So for example, a major site development review is that the commission would likely review is a residential development of more than 5 parcels. Also community facilities and parks, commercial projects of more than 15,000 square feet, multifamily residential projects such as new development for multifamily apartments. Minor site development review identified in that code amendment was single family residential projects less than or 2 to 4 parcels. Industrial, which was interesting, the industrial projects of any size. Commercial projects less than 15,000 square feet. So there's a threshold there that was deemed to be a differentiation between the process. And the difference is one will go to planning commission, and we also have in our planning division and community development has the ability to process in a more streamlined fashion through the minor site development review process, which many of our applicants enjoy that streamlined process. In many cases, you'll see developments that you may not have noticed. Hey, did it come through the planning commission? I don't recall that. Like you see maybe a new facade enhancement that came through or some new paint on a building that you don't recall. Maybe that might have been processed through minor site development review and some industrial developments as well. So based on that, we found there are 2 sections of the code. Let's see. Oh, I'm missing a slide. Okay, so there's 2 sections of the code. Basically, the code requires that any warehouse or product fulfillment center in the manufacturing zone right now, if it's less than 400,000 square feet, it's permitted. And anything over 400,000 square feet requires either a conditional use permit in the business park industrial zone or an administrative use permit, which is also a community development director process. So where this is inconsistent is that our code does allow for minor site development review for all industrial developments of any size. And what happens here is it's a duplicate efforts for us to have to process administrative use permit plus a site development review. So there's more components to it. There's more cost to it on the applicant. So with the recommendation for this evening, we're just asking that the Planning Commission provide us direction on a possible zoning code amendment to amend the zoning code for industrial in the manufacturing zones only, to allow for the warehouse and product fulfillment centers as permitted, but through with the minor site development review. It would be facilitated through that process. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I do have a now this was there was a lot of red and and one of the questions, and this might be something that's like left field, but one of the things that you also have to do, which costs the city money, is put it in a publication, right? And honestly, what publications do we have in the Valley anymore? So it's your direct mailing anyway within the 500. I mean, how relevant is that? And would it be worth saving, the money, or is that something we can talk about? Or it just seems like there's Press Enterprise is not here. The Valley News is not here. Like they'll deliver, 5 papers or, but they're not at every coffee shop or not like it used to be. So if it could save the city money, is it something to consider? Or, and it's not a big deal. It's just that as I was reading, everything made sense. And I just thought, why are we still paying money to do that when you direct mail anyway to everyone that's supposed to be within the 500 feet. Yeah, feet. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that back out, but I didn't really have questions for the other pieces.
HP, would you like me to take that one? Part of the reason is because state law requires it. So that's the big answer, is that for certain actions of the city as it relates to the use of property, and that's what we're talking about here, the city is required to publish notice in a newspaper. I completely understand that, not very many people read the legal notices section of the press enterprise, looking for, what projects are going to happen in the neighborhood. That's one of the reasons why I think staff does a good job of alternative avenues of getting the word out. And that's something that's a conversation that's happened at the city council as well. But it's not cheap to do the publications. But they are required. And I think generally speaking, and this, I'll kick it over to HP. Generally speaking, I believe the costs that are incurred by the city get reimbursed by the developer.
Oh,
for the most part.
Yes, for the most part, there are certain cost amounts that we charge to each applicant. However, sometimes the cost is not the exact as what the newspaper is collecting from the city. So there is sometimes a little less, sometimes it's a little more. So it does have its up and downs.
And it, like I said, it's state law. It's the cost of doing business when you're doing land development. They understand that. And I think of all of the costs that would go into building a 400,000 square foot warehouse, it doesn't end up being moving.
I just thought it was like redundant, like with, I've not seen a paper in forever, and like nobody, I don't know. But anyway, it's a moot point.
But it's a good discussion. I think when you're talking about, how the planning commission, if the planning commission has thoughts on a, obviously we have to comply with state law.
Sure, of course.
But if there are additional avenues that you think are worth at least exploring, I mean, they do add time and cost. But it has come, I can think of 2 recent occasions where a development or a zoning change came before the city council, and there were questions regarding, how do we know that the community knows about this project, because nobody's here. So I do think it's, something to at least consider.
I have a question. I have a few questions actually. On page, I understand. I think it's the 500 feet that we notify anybody within a 500-foot radius of any project. On page 27 of the letter D, there's one of them that mentioned 300 feet that the notice would be mailed out to. Is there a reason why, like, everything is 500 and that one's particularly 300?
Sorry, Vice Chair, I'm on page 27 of 63. Am I on the right page?
27 and D. So I was looking for page 27 on the actual computer.
Oh, I
Number
see.
D.
27
letter
and
D.
47 maybe.
27 letter D.
Just to clarify, this is the original. I just wanted to clarify what this document is. This is ordinance 1900 that was approved back in 2015. It's not what we're proposing today.
Oh.
This is already codified. I just wanted to clarify that. All we're asking for this evening is on page number 2, and it just shows a table, just taking out the square footage. Instead of it saying 400,000 and then or less than 400,000, just taking out the square footage reference, nothing else. And then of course, eliminating the administrative use permit provision and conditional use permit, and allowing it just permitted to be consistent with our minor site development review process.
Okay. So, and that, is that what you just mentioned where you're combining the CUP and like an SDR, it'll just be one instead of having two separate ones?
It's one, and we evaluate it. We have findings for it. We have to make sure that it complies with the zoning code. It has to with CEQA, all of those requirements as part of that process.
That's all the questions I have.
Commissioner Wirth.
I'll wait for my comments until after public hearing. Thank you.
I'm not sure. I think maybe after the staff is concluded, I did want to address the question about the 300 feet. So that is in our zoning code, but that mirrors government code section 65091. So when we're talking about, that's 65091. So when we're talking about a project that affects the use of property, like I was talking about before, in addition to the newspaper publication, the distance is 300 feet under state law. So that's why that number is there. But I can look toward the references for 500 that the commission was discussing.
Yeah, I could shed a little bit of light. I believe on the second paragraph or second sentence, it does identify that the director deems the proposal to have a greater effect. Then the director can make that distance a little bit longer or wider than the 300 feet. And it was in the practice in the past for this city to address 500 feet to capture more. At the time, the properties were a little larger. And so you really didn't capture the entire property owners that would be affected by that change. So that was the reason why it was increased to 500.
So 300 is state law minimum, and then this city moved to 500 voluntarily just to increase the notice.
Got it. Thank you.
Chair Wirth, I just wanted to address really quick the public hearing, close of public hearing.
Okay. Well, I guess my I first off, just to clarify that from page 17 to 42 with all the red ink, those aren't proposed changes, those are previous changes. That is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, I guess I spent a lot of time reviewing that without that being clear in the report. My general thought, as I've communicated in the past, is that we have to find a balance between promoting and facilitating development and making sure that our residents have an opportunity to provide input in what's being built around them. So I wanted to ask a couple questions. As you drive down the 215 or you drive down the 60, it's pretty clear kind of the change in development with e-commerce and logistics and all of the different buildings that are 700,000 to 2 million square feet. Huge footprints that permanently transform and change the view shed, the landscape, traffic, everything about an area. And I guess that's, it makes sense, especially in that corridor, being next to the March Global Port and being right next to freeways. Based on the proposed changes, the question I have for you, for staff is, so there's no limits, just to confirm, there's no limits in regards to the size of a logistics building that would then kind of make it go through the conditional permitting process. Is that correct? Of any size can go through?
Currently in the site development review provisions of the zoning code, so there are two sections of the code. Site development review identifies industrial development to be processed through the minor site development review process. Currently, right now, if a warehouse and product fulfillment center wanted to come in and they were 399,000 square feet, or just less than 400,000 square feet, they could go ahead and proceed forward to the minor site development review. It still needs a minor site development review, but in the permitted uses, it's permitted as P. Now, if it's over 400,000 square feet, then there's additional findings that have to be made. It requires administrative use permit, which is still through the community development director for the M1 and M2 zones. The one that requires a conditional use permit. So if a warehouse and product fulfillment center wanted to come in and they're over 400,000 square feet and they're in the business park industrial zone, the BP zone, it does currently right now in the zoning code require a conditional use permit.
So that's the public hearing aspect of it, right? Anything that requires conditional permitting is going to trigger the public hearing process and allow the public to provide some input, right?
The minor site development review process also requires a public hearing. It is also a public hearing, and adjacent property owners and tenants and residents are notified, and they do have an opportunity to provide their input. And it's also important to know that if in that case, if it becomes contentious or they want to appeal it, it's appealable to the Planning Commission.
Yeah. So I guess I'm a little confused here. Anything that is on this matrix that is underneath a P still has to go to public hearing?
Many of if it's an existing building and it's P, most likely not. It's permitted, but when it's a vacant piece of land and they have to actually construct new build, it does have to go through a process.
Commissioner Wirth, if I can add a little to that, the P indicates a permitted use within the matrix. However, in this particular context of the industrial building, it does have and require a minor site development review process. In that process, we do have to notify the neighboring property owners of what is changing or happening to that subject property. So yes, they would have to be notified. They would get a public hearing notice, but the reviewing body would not be the Planning Commission, rather the Community Development Director. However, some of the P that's identified in the matrix, let's say a grocery store at a commercial zone, would be just a permitted use, and you would not have to go through the process if it's less than 15,000 square feet.
So I'm sorry, HP. So when you say it, you still notify the neighbors within 500 feet, but the review process is at staff level, not at the commission level.
That is correct for the minor site development review process.
Right. So just as an illustration, if you're driving down Gilman Springs Road and you get on the 60 freeway, you got the Skechers facility there. I think we've all seen that as we drive. That's 1.82 million square feet building. If that's under a P in the matrix, it does not go to the Planning Commission. It would go directly to the staff for review and not to the Planning Commission. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, we would love to have Skechers building in City of Hemet. That would greatly help the development for the city. But yes, what you're identifying, if that building and that area would be part of the City of Hemet with our current regulations, yes, that would be the correct statement.
Okay. So what I'm really interested in is having an understanding of what the local agencies within our vicinity are doing. City of Marina Valley, City of Paris. City of Paris has a very large area that they've opened up to logistics, and I think they've done a great job of making sure that these developers are building streets and streetscapes and everything associated with their business in a way that is complementary to the community. I would be very interested in knowing or understanding what the differences are between what's being proposed in this action and what the other the local cities and City of Menifee, City of Temecula, City of Paris, City of San Jacinto have. And so I personally I have a little bit of a hesitation about removing the Planning Commission from the process. At the same time, I completely understand the value of streamlining the process and trying to avoid the abuse of that process. I think, as we've seen in recent meetings, with challenges to that public review process. And I'm not by any means advocating opening up these developers up to additional unneeded scrutiny. I just feel strongly that the commission has a role, and when you're talking about a 1.8 million square feet or whatever size, these are huge permanent changes to our landscape, to our viewshed, and I'm all for it, but I think our community needs to have an opportunity to participate in that dialogue. With that being said, I think it would be well worth the time to come back and say, hey, this is what everyone else is doing. And whether we're consistent or not consistent, I would just really like to know that. So I'm personally am in favor of moving this item and getting a little bit more information from staff on what other land use agencies are doing, and have a little more opportunity to review this prior to taking the Planning Commission out of the process.
Commissioner Wirth, if I could just clarify, I do understand your concerns, but what's before you tonight is not to remove the Planning Commission, rather to be consistent with how the ordinance was adopted at the time and the way that our code is being identified on the matrix. So there's an inconsistency that we're just trying to bring it into consistency. If the commission would like us to review and bring back some of the surrounding cities as to what they're doing, we're more than happy to do that. This is a work study. This is exact form that we can have a discussion of what's happening around us and how you want us as the Planning Commission to proceed forward in reviewing how the industrial building gets reviewed in the future. But this is not to eliminate or remove Planning Commissioner's role, but rather to bring the ordinance into consistency as it was adopted.
Can I ask you a quick question? I think the understanding, and Commissioner Wirth, please correct me if I'm off track. I think it seemed like, first of all, we thought all the red were proposed changes. Then what it looked like to me, and I could be way off, is under 400,000 was minor, over you want now minor. So over 400 would go to commission, and now I think that's what we need to clarify, because I think that might help.
Sure. So Monique, if you can put that slide back. No, previous one. So right there. So this is an excerpt from section 90-48. So which identifies is that second part, minor site development review. So this is how it was adopted with industrial projects of any size would be all minor site development review. That's how it was adopted. But for some reason, the matrix itself still identified as needing a conditional use permit. So that's what we're trying to clarify, not that we're revamping or taking Planning Commission out of the role.
So it was just for clarification purposes, it was never coming to Planning Commission anyway. So we're not changing that at all. Like it wasn't coming.
Mm-mm.
We're just literally changing the paper on the matrix.
Correct. That's how it was adopted at the time.
Also, can I clarify one additional observation I just wanted to mention? So where it says, and I apologize all the red, but where it says A, currently right now, if a new industrial development, the way the code is written today, if a new warehouse and fulfillment center wanted to come in and they were 800,000 square feet, and they're in the M1 or the M1 general manufacturing, limited manufacturing, and M2 zones, it goes to the community development director now already. So we're not asking to change that.
I think that's what we had to clarify.
Yeah, we're just asking for that just to be a clean P so that we could just process the minor site development review. I guess you could say the change would be in the business park zone. The business park zone, if it's over 400,000 square feet, is really the fundamental change that the commission would be, making that determination. Right now, if you're in the business park zone, which is more of the business park.
But that's not what this one is proposing.
Yeah, so this one here, that is really the change that we're asking. Does require planning commission conditional use permit to evaluate the use. And the threshold was made that, 400,000, anything over that requires the commission to look a closer look at the use. But it's the use of itself is very general. A warehouse and fulfillment center or e-commerce is a very light, if you will, a light manufacturing type of use. There are several uses outlined in this permitted in the manufacturing uses table that do require planning commission's approval, and that would never change. That would not change, and we're not asking for any additional changes to the land use table permitted uses. So, for example, if an animal boarding was going to go into a facility, the planning commission would look at that. Like sensitive uses, like recycling collection centers, things that could be of more of a sensitive nature, a mortuary, those types of uses could be something that the commission would need to look at the actual use itself and really, evaluate that to
But
see.
a shoe factory or a delivery company or something like that would not.
It would be, well, generally it's considered an administrative type of use that would not generate, if it's e-commerce, storage of and logistics, similar to like how we had the recent code amendment that we did for laboratories, biotechnology, those types of uses that are lighter in general. Now, if you have a heavy manufacturing type of use, now I don't know the operation that Skechers had and how to compare that, but just looking at that, that's what we're asking tonight really, is that currently right now the commission is not reviewing the even if it does go over 400,000 square feet, they don't look at that. That goes currently through the community development director.
Okay, thank you.
If I might. So I think staff has said it pretty clearly. I get there's a little bit of confusion. The site development review, as I understand, is primarily related to the structures. It's not related to the use itself. And then you have the uses, which are warehouses and product fulfillment centers, right? And so for this one, the only time, as it's written now, that a warehouse would come to the planning commission is if it's in a business park and if it's over 400,000 square feet. Business park is a pretty limited zone in the city. There's not that many parcels. I think there's one next to the lakes over by the auto center. And then there's one north of Henley Park. you know where the school district headquarters is? There's a big vacant lot there. Those are the only two that like I'm aware of. So, you know, for what it's worth, as you're kind of deliberating on this, I would say that, you know, they are in proximity to residential uses. Business park tends to be closer to residential uses than the manufacturing zones, which are primarily concentrated around the airport itself. And then I think there's some up along like State Street, close to the border with San Jacinto. And then the other thing that I want to just kind of give some feedback on, since you're having a workshop, I've done a lot of land use work in two communities that went from greenfields to massive warehouses everywhere. And, you know, one of the kind of thought process when we're talking about the size of the structure was, when it comes to the impacts on the community, there's not a heck of a lot of a difference between 1 million square foot building and 2 500,000 square foot buildings, right? It's the same amount of floor space. It's the same amount of goods coming in and out. It's the same number of trucks. One of the ways that those communities dealt with this issue, because, you know, you're looking at it from this perspective of, I mean, do we just want to, you know, open the gate and wave everybody through, or do we want to do a public hearing on every single warehouse that comes in? One of the things that the planning commissions in both those communities really, I think, discovered after a while is that after a while, the warehouses all start to look the same. They're all a giant box that gets filled up with various goods, and you have trucks coming in and out. And so one of the ways that they dealt with it, that I think could maybe be something you explore with staff, and that may be addressing some of these concerns, is doing a lot of the regulation and the studying of these structures and uses on the front end. One community I dealt with did a programmatic environmental impact report. So that's a fancy way of saying they studied the environmental effects for turning a whole area into industrial parks, as opposed to doing an EIR for every little building that came in. And they were able to come up with okay, so this is how we're going to deal. If this whole area turns into warehouses, which is what we've zoned it for, and for economic development purposes and everything, we'd like that to happen maybe. You know, we're going to say, what if it's completely built out? What are the traffic impacts? What are the air quality impacts? What are the noise impacts? And then that way, you as a commission, the council as a decision-making body, can say up front, this is what we're getting into by doing this. And then you don't necessarily have to do the project by project. Oh, look, it's another big box. You would have already done all that work on the front end, and then the administrative review could just be, you know, and frankly, it can be an incentive. It also gives an opportunity for the public at the front end, instead of boiling the frog slow, you know, they get to say, okay, look, if this thing gets built out, what's it going to look like? Everyone gets on board at the front end. And then after that, I mean, the decision's made. If, you know, come and build if you want. So those are two kind of ways to look at it.
Any other questions or comments?
I would just say, I'm sorry, Chair. Then I'm gonna continue on this a little bit, and I appreciate that, Council. That's I think that kind of illustrates that there's probably a little more work needed on this, in my opinion. You know, I had a whole slew of comments in regards to all the red that was, I guess, adopted 7 years ago. But I guess one of the things that is that we can all agree on is that in the last 7 years, there's been a significant kind of transition on logistics, you know, and fulfillment centers, construction and development. It's huge. And I think there's an opportunity for the city of Hemet to position itself to accept and welcome this development in our area, but also take a look at what's worked and what hasn't worked in other land use agencies, kind of like you were referring to. The way this is written right now, my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, but my understanding is Planning Commission is pretty much out of the loop for all industrial warehouses and product fulfillment centers. And I'm not personally, I'm not ready to say that that's a good idea. I would like more information on what other land use agencies are doing. And you know, maybe some examples like council mentioned in regards to how to address making sure that we provide our community with an opportunity to provide input to the way that our area is developed. So I do not support this as written. I would support moving this to another meeting with additional information from staff.
Commissioner Wirth, this is not a public hearing item. It's a work study, so it's a perfect environment where we can discuss different options and what the other cities are doing, things of that sort. So absolutely.
There's no vote on this one. Other comments or questions?
So Chair, I would say, you know, it's a discussion. There's no need. You're not being asked to approve an ordinance. But as Commissioner Wirth said, if there is information that the Planning Commission would like, I think it'd be appropriate for the commission as a whole to make it clear that that's information you would like. You know, with respect, you know, to one commissioner, you know, asking for things. I think it's better if that direction maybe came from the commission as a whole. So I believe Commissioner Wirth was asking for additional information on who the approving authority is and what the process is for industrial projects in other surrounding communities. So if the commission wanted staff to research that and bring it back, that would seem to be appropriate.
And I think just to clarify, Commissioner Wirth, we're interested in items over 400,000 square feet. Is that correct?
You know, I mean, the 400,000 and 7, you know, that came from the 2015 resolution. I'd like to just see what other agencies are doing of all sizes, and just kind of get an understanding of what's worked and what hasn't worked, so that we can make sure we're leveraging lessons learned here. So it's not a square footage size, kind of like what was mentioned earlier. You can have a whole bunch of 400,000 square foot buildings next to each other, and it kind of ends up being the same thing. I just think in regards to these large warehouse type developments, like we see when you drive down 215 or the 60, there's enough of it out there that we should be able to leverage lessons learned and have a better understanding of what works and what doesn't work for the city.
So maybe specifically Moreno Valley and Paris to reach out and see how they handle their industrial spaces with the Planning Commission specifically. Any other comments or questions? Thank you. Thank you. With that, we'll move to department reports. 12A, City Attorney reports.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I believe staff's going to be queuing up the training PowerPoint. Looks that way. All right, thank you very much. So my understanding, first of all, thank you for having me back at the Planning Commission. I know you've had the pleasure of having my colleague, Lauren Sanchez. She's unfortunately wasn't able to come tonight. and but it's good to spend time with the Planning Commission again. My understanding was that the Planning Commission had asked for a quick presentation on common legal issues that face planning commissions. I also wanted to just note for everybody's information that I'm working with the city clerk's office on also having every member of the Planning Commission receive AB 1234 training. So this is mandatory ethics training for government officials. I have 2 commissioners scheduled for tomorrow. We will then reach out to the others and get everybody in. It's 2 hours long. We're going to be covering some of the same stuff I'm going to cover tonight. No, I can't deduct it from the mandatory 2 hours. Sorry. But I did think it would be good just to go over some of the bigger questions. We have a new commissioner. I know that some of these things have come up before, and so maybe it'll just be an opportunity to maybe have a discussion about some of the bigger issues. When we go into the trainings, the 2-hour trainings, I tend to run that as a here's the information, but it's more of a conversation to get the questions that are on your mind. So without that, we'll dive into it. I'm a lawyer, so everything comes with a disclaimer. I am a lawyer. I am not your lawyer. I am the city attorney. So I represent the city. I represent the commission. If any member of the public is reading this, I hope it is informative to you, but it is not legal advice. I always put this when we talk about the Brown Act. So I've divided this presentation into 2 sections, the Brown Act and then public hearings, because both of those have a very common thread, which is how do we involve the public in the decision-making process of this body. The Brown Act applies to everything that this body, the city council, any other legislative body of the city, infrastructure commission, et cetera, how they operate. The second part of the presentation relates specifically to public hearings on what I call quasi-judicial hearings. And I know it's a lot. We'll get into what I'm talking about there. But that is essentially a heightened standard. So I thought it was really good that we were talking about notice, because we're going to talk about notice when we get there. So the Brown Act requires that we put out an agenda, right? Posted 72 hours in advance. But some items you consider we have to put in the newspaper. Some items we have to mail. We'll talk about why that is when we get to that section. But we're starting with the Brown Act, which is the foundation for all public meetings of the city. And I always put up here the purpose. Now, the thing I hate about PowerPoint presentations is when somebody puts a PowerPoint presentation up and it's a wall of text and all they do is read it, right? I could have just given you a staff report. You could have read it yourself. And, I wouldn't have had to go through the effort of a PowerPoint presentation. But I always read this one. I always read this one because I think it's important. This is what the legislature put at the very beginning of the Brown Act. The legislature finds and declares that the public commissions, boards, and councils and other public agencies in this state exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business. It is the intent of the law that their actions be taken openly and their deliberations be conducted openly. And so the point of that is we don't make secret decisions in government. If we're going to make a decision about passing a law, if we're going to make a decision about approving a conditional use permit, we're going to do it in public. We're going to have the public's going to be able to come in, comment on it. People can, come in on YouTube and see what we're doing. And that's, I think, the critical part of the Brown Act. The Brown Act is something like 30 individual statutes long. I think I printed it out before and it's like 48 pages. But if I could condense that entire law down to one sentence that I hope everyone who's listening to this walks away from, it would be that business must be conducted at public meetings. Okay. The first thing then is, well, what's a meeting? This is a meeting. It's a gathering of a majority of the members of the Planning Commission to hear or discuss any item of city business or potential business, right? So if 3 of you are over at Destination getting coffee, talking about industrial projects in the city of Hemet, you're having a meeting within the context of the Brown Act because it's a majority of the members of the Planning Commission. So that's a quorum, that's 3. Anytime that happens, it has to be at an agendized public meeting, which means one of these has to be prepared. It has to be published by the city, letting the public know where we're going to meet, when we're going to meet, and what we're going to talk about, right? So we can't, unfortunately, your days of coffee and conversation have come to a bit of an end, at least as it relates to the 5 of you on the commission. Most business has to be conducted in an open session.
I'm sorry,
right?
council, I apologize for interrupting. Is there, can we put that presentation up on the screen? It's not being shown.
Oh, we're seeing it on the screen, but maybe the Zoom. Okay, looks like staff is working on that, Commissioner Wirth.
Okay, great, thank you. Go ahead and continue. Thank you.
All right, can you see it now?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for letting us know. And to the members of the public, and enjoy the PowerPoint. Most of it has to be conducted in open session. The city council regularly meets in closed session because there are very specific circumstances where the city council can meet to talk in private. Those exceptions are primarily my responsibility and the city clerk's responsibility to know and to make sure that they are properly noticed. But the short version is, it's always in a context where if the public knew the content of the conversation, it would harm the agency. So if we're talking about settling a lawsuit, if I sit up here and talk with the council in public in front of everybody, and the council tells me, okay, Mr. City Attorney, you have authority up to $10,000 to settle this lawsuit. If I did that on tape, the plaintiff in the lawsuit would know exactly how much money that I was capable of settling for. It'd be kind of hard to hold a negotiation. Same thing when it comes to real property negotiations. We want to be able to know where we stand. We don't want the other side to know. Same thing with labor negotiations. So it's always a situation where we're in some kind of negotiation standpoint, or there's another privacy interest at stake. Those don't typically come up with the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission doesn't buy real property. The Planning Commission doesn't enter into labor negotiations. The Planning Commission rarely gets sued because usually something goes to the City Council after it comes here if it's going to be litigated. So it's rare that we'll have a closed session, but just know that they do exist, and that if we do call one, it will be on the agenda and it will state why we're having it. In terms of the public part of this sentence, the public participates, right? So we had public comment at today's meeting. It's on the agenda. It's something that we are required to have under the Brown Act. We're required at a regular meeting to allow someone to make public comment on any item on the agenda or items not on the agenda, but are within the jurisdiction of the body, right? So for the Planning Commission, that is somewhat limited, right? So if someone came to the Planning Commission and said, I think that we, just pulling an item that we did at City Council, I think that we need to buy a new fire engine, right? The Planning Commissioners individually, you may think that's a great idea. You may think that's not a great idea. But ultimately, the Planning Commission doesn't decide whether we buy fire engines at the city or not. So it would be improper for that to come to the Planning Commission. That's appropriate to go to the City Council. But anything on the agenda is typically what you're going to be getting. I think I clicked the wrong button. So common issues that we have, remembering to take public comment. So this one, I think, happens occasionally. We're on a routine item. We don't see anyone here. We don't have a slip. A good practice is always when we come to an item to say, is there any public comment on that one, even if you don't have a slip in front of you, just to make sure. I know that the clerk will ask anyone online. Ultimately, if the commission makes a decision on something and then someone says, hey, I wanted to speak on that, usually we can fix it by saying, okay, well, we'll reconsider the motion. Come on up, give your piece. Does anybody want to change their vote? No. Okay. And then you move forward. But it's something that's important. We want to make sure that we're taking public comment. That's why it's on the agenda. The thing is, the public is perfectly free to come and comment on a work study too. And I think one of the questions, as you are a new chair, one of the questions when it comes to agenda items, right, is where do you want public comment to be, right, when you're considering the item? Do you want it to be at the very beginning of the agenda? And so, someone makes a public comment and, it's very efficient because, people come to the meeting, they don't want to sit here for 2 hours. they want to say their piece. But maybe 2 hours later, their comment isn't really fresh in your mind. Do you want them to be making it contemporaneously with when you're considering the item? That certainly makes it so that it's fresh in your mind, but they also had to sit here to make their comment. So that's something to consider. The way the Planning Commission does it on your current agenda is it's public comment for any item not on the agenda occurs at the beginning, and then public comments on each item are taken as that item comes up, with the theory that people are going to want to make their statements contemporaneous with the project after they've heard the presentation, and also because many of your items are those public hearings that we talked about, and for those you have to take it contemporaneously. So just to standardize the practice, make it easier on you, we tend to do it as the items come up, but it's something to think about. Regulating public comment. So we do have a resolution that's been approved by the City Council, 4545, that imposes reasonable restrictions on public comment. This is not open mic night at the Planning Commission, okay? We can put reasonable restrictions on the length of time. The council has decided that a reasonable amount of time for most comments is 3 minutes. And we can also limit it to things that are relevant, right? So like I said, you can't just come to the podium and make comments about anything that's on your mind today. It has to be something that's relevant to the Planning Commission. And the theory behind this is that while people certainly have a right to participate, we want their participation. That's the whole point of having a public meeting. The business of this commission has to get done at some point. If you let somebody have unlimited time, they could essentially filibuster the Planning Commission, and you wouldn't be able to get your work done. And I've seen it attempted anyway. Responding to public comment. This is something that does come up, more often maybe at City Council meeting, but could occasionally come up at Planning Commission. Someone comes up and they make a statement, and you want to respond, right? You want to talk about it. They bring up a good point, like that's an interesting topic. We should talk about it. Unfortunately, the commission may only discuss items that are on the agenda, and so if they're bringing up something that's not on the agenda, right? The Planning Commission may briefly respond to that, say, oh, that's a good point. You'll see this at City Council meeting more often than not. Someone will come up, they'll make a statement about an issue, and maybe the city manager, maybe I will just give a 10-second just response. That's an interesting issue which is being worked on by, in this way. You may have the mayor or a member of the council, or in your guys' case, a member of the commission, say that, what, we'd like to place that on a future agenda to discuss, right? Or refer the item to staff in response. So that happens pretty regularly at City Council meetings. They'll say, someone will come up and they'll say, look, I have this problem. I've been having this problem with the city. The mayor will say, please give your contact information to the city clerk so the city manager can respond and deal with that. So those are the 3 options you have: briefly respond, put it on a future agenda, refer it to city staff.
Can that be brought up immediately after a public comment's been made, or can you say that during the Planning Commissioner's report at the end of the meeting?
To put it on a future agenda, yes, either one's fine. Yeah, so you can do it immediately. Say, can we place that on a future agenda? And then that person knows that it's being taken care of. Or you have a place on your agenda to add things to the future. You can say, hey, you know what? I've been thinking about it. I want to talk about what that person brought up during public comment. Serial meetings. So this is one of the more difficult concepts initially, but once you get it, you get it. So the example I gave of a meeting was 3 of you at coffee at destination, right? But suppose that 2 of you had coffee and talked about a project. That's not a quorum. That's not a meeting. There's nothing wrong with one-on-one conversations, okay? But suppose the 2 of you had your conversation, and then 1 of you went and talked to a 3rd member of the commission, right? That's another one-on-one conversation, right? You may say to yourself, that's fine. 3 of us were never in the same place talking about this, therefore no meeting. Not so, says the Brown Act. And you'll find that this is how the Brown Act was written. It started off very small, and they've been adding to it over time to basically plug leaks in the dam. And so what we have here is they added a provision that prevents what are called serial meetings. So that's when A talks to B, then B talks to C. 3 of you have now talked about a topic within your jurisdiction, not at a public meeting. right? So the advice I always give is to, if you're talking with one of your fellow commissioners about an issue, my question is, have you talked with any other commissioners about this, right? And if they say, oh, you're right, I talked to the chair about this yesterday, we can't talk about it, right? The other thing to keep in mind is it's possible to have a serial meeting, not directly A to B, B to C, but through an intermediary, right? So perhaps there is someone who's not even a member of city staff, just a member of the public, right? If you are using that person to communicate amongst each other, right, that would potentially be a serial meeting. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't talk to you, right? They can tell you information all day long. You can't use that person to communicate between each other, okay? And then, like I said, the Brown Act is a series of patches. They had to figure out how to deal with Facebook. And, you know, it only took them like 10 years after Facebook was invented to come up with how they're going to regulate it. And they got down really to the nitty gritty on this. So one of the issues that they were having was the easy one, right? One of you posts about something related to the Planning Commission on a public page, on your personal page, on a semi-private page. You know, there are a lot of Facebook groups that are limited to Hemet only. You know, that's not open to the public generally, but, you know, it's mostly open to Hemet residents. And what they were having was council members, commissioners making a post, and then having other council members or commissioners replying to the post. That's just as bad as sitting next to each other and having a conversation, right? So they said none of that. And then even further, because one of the things that the problems they were having was, say a commissioner posts something and then someone else comes along and likes it, right? They take that as communicating. They take that as prohibited communication. Like I said, your coffee days are over. Unfortunately, so are your liking each other's posts. You're prohibited from liking each other's posts about items within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. So, you know, just be careful. That doesn't mean that you can't like posts on things that are unrelated. Oh, you know, look at this wonderful vacation. I don't know if people still post pictures of food that they ate. I know there's like pictures of babies. I see that all the time. So that's fine. Things that are within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission. Don't like it. Don't comment on it. You didn't see it. Okay. Any questions? So I'm about to go to the frequently asked questions. All right. One-on-one conversations. We already talked about that. That's okay. Right. So if you see another commissioner, feel free to engage in a one-on-one conversation with them. I advise that you ask them, have you spoke to anybody else about this on the commission before you talk to them, just to ensure you don't have that serial meeting. Community events, social events. Look, there's a reason you guys are on the Planning Commission. It's because you're active in the community. So you're going to be going to events that are being put on by civic organizations, fundraisers, community nights. Those are fine. Okay. A majority of you can go to those. If it's a community event that's being put on or a social event that's being put on by an entity that's not the city, you're free to go to it and participate as part of their regular program, so long as it's open to the public. Okay. So give you a good example. Say, I don't know, the Chamber of Commerce was having a business mixer, right? Open to anyone, could come, you know, drink coffee, meet with fellow businesses. Love that. A majority of the Planning Commission could go, right? And participate as part of that, you know, have coffee, talk with people. That's great. Same thing with social events. You know, we have the annual Christmas parade, things like that. Fine for a majority to go. I highly recommend that a majority of you not be in the same spot talking to each other, not because it's prohibited by the Brown Act. You're free to talk to each other about social things, but simply because of the appearance. It looks like you might be having an issue with the Brown Act. You'll see me, you know, at events like this. I kind of am a mother hen. I will walk by and this is what I'll go 1, 2, 3. I will look you in the eye and I'll go 1, 2, 3. And then I always say that, oh, okay, thanks, city attorney. And then, you know, someone has to leave, right? So, and then finally, staff briefings. So this is one-way communication from staff to members of the commission or members of the council, especially when you're new, getting a pre-briefing on just what are these things on the agenda, maybe asking some questions, that's fine. So having those one-on-ones with staff, having those one-on-ones with council, perfectly okay to go over the agenda, talk to you about it. What I won't and what staff won't do is talk to you about what other commissioners think, what their questions were, anything like that. I can talk to you about the project. So can staff. Okay. All right. So that's the end of the Brown Act section. And again, that is a 30,000 foot at 500 miles an hour. Look at the Brown Act. For those of you doing training tomorrow, you look forward to 2 hours of that. There will be food. All right. So then we go into public hearings. So this is a step up, right? So we had the Brown Act, which covers every meeting of the city, right? Of legislative bodies of the city. Now we're going to talk about when we are making important decisions that affect one person or one property owner or a neighborhood specifically, how we have to increase that level of notice, transparency, and fairness. The Planning Commission has two roles, as does the City Council, a legislative role and then what's called a quasi-judicial role. The legislative role is pretty straightforward. These are developing the rules of the game, right? So when the Planning Commission is saying we're going to change the requirements for industrial buildings from conditionally permitted to permitted, which is what we're discussing in the workshop, you're taking a legislative role. That is a rule that will be applicable to everybody in the city, right? That's a zoning rule. When you're doing that, you have a lot of discretion, right? To make decisions. You know, you can have opinions on these things, like that's fine. We're not talking about that. What we're going to be talking about is the quasi-judicial role. So this is when you apply those rules that you made up and you apply them to one person, right? So you're not in Congress passing laws, you're a judge sitting on a bench applying it to a person. Does that make sense? In your case, not a criminal, it's an applicant, okay? Very different. So we're going to apply those rules to individual applicants. And an example of that is a conditional use permit. So you have somebody comes in, says, I want to start a liquor store at this location. You're not talking about what are the rules generally applicable to all liquor stores. You're talking about how are we going to treat this particular property. And in that case, we have what is called a quasi-judicial hearing, more commonly known as public hearings, and we have special rules. So those additional rules primarily relate to ensuring that people are being treated fairly and being given due process. What does it mean to treat someone fairly and give them due process? And I'm not just talking about the applicant, I'm talking about their neighbors, right? Well, three things: notice, opportunity to be heard, and an unbiased decision maker, right? You are the decision makers in this scenario. Notice, we talked about this earlier. We ordinarily give notice for all items by an agenda that we post on the city's website, and we post at I think 2 or 3 locations physically throughout the city. Okay, 72 hours in advance. When we're talking about a quasi-judicial hearing, so a public hearing on a specific land use application, we have increased notice requirements that exist both under state law, which is how come I happened to know that code section off the top of my head. I am a good attorney. I promised that I wasn't showboating. I happen to have looked that up earlier today because I wanted to give a specific example for this presentation. When we're talking about the notice that we give under state law, that includes notice that is published in the newspaper, as expensive and time-consuming as that may be. That includes notice that is mailed to adjacent property owners. State law requires 300. Our code allows up to 500, so we get additional notice. And what that usually, just so we know kind of how that works, staff will usually get a map of the property that is subject to the application, and then they will use software to draw a 500-foot line around the border. And then they will look at all the properties that touches, and then they use a consultant, or do we do it in-house? It's in the mailing. Yeah, so we have a consultant who says, okay, these are the properties, get the addresses, mail them out. And the purpose of that is, look, if they were going to build, a warehouse next to my house, I'd want to know, and I might have some comments on that. And this commission has certainly seen when projects are coming forward, usually it's adjacent residences that, want to make sure that, the project is not going to have an adverse effect on their enjoyment of their property. Sometimes we have adjacent property or business owners. The one I remember the most was we had a medical facility that was next to a car wash, right? And the medical facility was concerned about the blowers being adjacent to their building and the noise that would have. So the commission talked about it and addressed that issue. So that's why we give notice. We want the people around the project to know what's going on. Opportunity to be heard. So this is where we go from the 3 minutes that's required under the city council resolution, and we talk about sometimes that needs to be expanded. We need to give people that are affected, that have their rights affected by this project, a reasonable amount of time to present their testimony and evidence. For most people, that's 3 minutes. Okay. For most people, they can come up and say, I'm concerned about the noise, and I'm concerned about the traffic, and I'm concerned about the construction. We can get that done in 3 minutes. But when we're talking about the applicant, the applicant may come up and they've got to respond to all these concerns. The commission may want to give them additional time. Same thing, if you do have an adjacent property owner who is particularly affected, you may want to give them additional time to fully give their point of view. That doesn't mean they get unlimited time, right? The draft rules that the city council has in their protocols allow up to 15 minutes for the applicant and 3 minutes for everybody else, unless the chair determines that additional time is warranted so that they have a fair chance to speak their piece. And just going back to that for 1 second, oftentimes what you'll find, especially if we get into these big industrial buildings, you may find someone who's opposed to it on environmental grounds, and they may show up with a box of comments and data and studies, and they will drop it off as they give their comment. And then you will have to decide how we're going to actually hear all this information in a reasonable amount of time. Usually you're going to end up continuing the hearing so that information can be considered. All right, last thing, unbiased. So the planning commission should not actually or have the perception of favoring one side over the other in these deliberations. So what does that mean, right? If your lifelong friend is the applicant, maybe you're not capable of being unbiased on the decision on their application, right? It's a common law conflict of interest is what that's referred to. Financial interests. If you have an ownership stake in one of the applications, if you're an employee of the business that's coming forward, and we'll go over those in more depth in the ethics training, exactly what, is a disqualifying financial interest. One of the ones that comes up often, because obviously you all live in the city because you're on the planning commission or in the sphere of influence. If you own property that's next to or nearby, that project may affect your property's value, right? So you might be one of the people out in the audience who says, I have some concerns about this, how it's going to affect me. That might make you biased and you may need to recuse yourself. The standard we use for that is 500 feet. Generally speaking, you're going to want to make sure that staff has your home address and the address of any property that you own in the city. I think generally speaking, they use GIS to make sure that if a project does come within that range, that you are informed. Like, oh, by the way, this project is near your house, so you may need to recuse yourself. And then the last one is the one to be careful on, because people are going to know that you're planning commissioners. They may say, hey, what are you doing about that warehouse that's coming in down the street, right? You may be tempted to say, oh man, I hate warehouses. I'm going to make sure that that thing does not get built, right? You can't do that because if you do that, you have prejudged the application. You need to come to the hearing with an open mind, hear the application, hear the public comments, get the staff report, and then make your decision. If you give the impression that you've already made a decision before the public hearing on it, then you're expressing bias and you may have to recuse yourself from that item. Although it wasn't in the big three, these are small threes, part of the small three, ex parte communications and acts. Some cities prohibit it. And they say you're not allowed to talk to developers, you're not allowed to talk to neighbors, You're not allowed to talk to anybody about a project before it. This city doesn't, because I think this city takes a much more reasonable approach to it. They understand people are going to want to talk to you. Okay. What my recommendation is that you state on the record at the beginning of the hearing, if you have had a communication or received information about an application that isn't going to be in front of the commission, because that affects how you're going to vote, right? You have information that nobody else has, right? And the other one, and this is something that frankly, if I was on the planning commission, I would probably do, is site visits, right? Drive by, you know what the address is in the backup, you know, maybe the weekend before you want to go and drive by, look around the neighborhood, see how you think it might affect. I think it's a good idea to disclose that. Like, oh, by the way, people, I drove by, I looked at the neighborhood. It's not a big deal, but I think it's a good thing to disclose. Key takeaways: don't express opinions on applications before the hearing, in support or in opposition. Listen attentively to the hearing. I think that, you know, we're all very busy people. I think we all have these little devices that are constantly dinging in our faces. I think it's important that the applicant, members of the public, you know, understand that you are listening, being fair, being deliberative. If you're not paying attention, there could be an argument to be made that somehow the decision being made by the city was improper. And then do disclose those expiatory communications and information received outside the hearing. That is the conclusion of my very fast-ish presentation. I hope it was informative. If you have any questions, happy to answer them. Okay.
There is one on the flip side of notice. In the recent one we had, we received a letter the day of the meeting from the law firm. And so we had to postpone the meeting because we didn't review the material that was given the day of. And then I believe they did it again within a couple of days of the meeting. But is there a certain number that we cap off if somebody keeps trying to do that to intentionally prolong the CUP or whatever they're applying for?
That's a good question. So it's a very common tactic to, especially when, and not speaking about a particular project, right? Just speaking generally, it's a very common tactic of law firms who are representing people who are opposed to projects to show up and document bomb the planning commission, because they know that in order to be fair, the planning commission has to be given a chance to review that information so that you can make an informed decision. They know that you're not going to be capable of doing it that night, right? The intent, at least in my understanding, is to get a continuance of the item to delay the project. You know, that being said, you know, is it successful? I mean, you know, my recommendation to the planning commission, like any other information you receive, is to review it, to, you know, have staff review it, to get an understanding of what the point of view of that person is. I don't think it's fair to necessarily judge the position based on the tactic. I think that, you know, there's oftentimes useful information that can be considered, and the standard procedure for those things is simply to keep the public hearing open, continue it to the next meeting to allow staff and the commission time to review, and the applicant, because they probably want to respond, to allow everyone an opportunity to review all that information that's been dumped, and to respond accordingly and make a fair decision. I think it's perfectly fair on the flip side of that to say, we're going to continue this public hearing to the next meeting to give time to consider this evidence. But, you know, if someone shows up at the next meeting and tries the same thing, you know, this was the public hearing that was noticed. This was the date that was noticed. If you had something to say, you should have come at this meeting. If you're going to show up at the next meeting and try that again, you know, maybe we're not going to give as much weight to that at that time.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the city report? Community development reports.
I have nothing to report.
Future agenda items.
That I do have something to say. We had a safety element and environmental justice workshop that was conducted on May 11th. There wasn't a lot of participation. We will have a second meeting for a workshop, so you guys are more than welcome to join. Again, keeping in mind the Brown Act, so only 2 of you will be able to participate in that. So that'll be coming for you. If you have missed it, then we will be putting up the YouTube video onto our webpage so they can go back and listen and view. There's some lively discussion on the matter, even though we had small group, so it may be beneficial to view that. We also have a couple of different items coming for you. We have excuse me. Single family residential development for DR Horton coming before you, as well as another track for Richmond American coming for you in the future. That's all I have.
Planning Commissioner reports.
Commissioner Booth, if you have anything you would like to comment at this point, you're more than welcome to do that. Commissioner Hill's absent. Commissioner Lemke,
Nothing to report.
Commissioner Beamsterfer,
I'd like to welcome Commissioner Booth to the commission and nothing to report.
and Commissioner Wirth.
Yeah, I would like to welcome Commissioner Booth. I'm sorry that I was not there to meet you in person. I'll see you next meeting, and welcome aboard.
Thank you so much.
With that, our meeting is adjourned.